We have a case that's headed to the Supreme Court. It's about free speech. A family member has escalated a case because there was a terrorist organization that had targeted someone in their family, and now that family member is suing the big tech platforms for what happened to their family member. So to simplify everything, we have now the Supreme Court, who has discretion over what cases they're going to hear over Section 230, publisher platform, if a platform is responsible or if they're not. Now, in general, platforms are not responsible because we have that stipulation in the law of Section 230 where a platform has immunity from lawsuits, and that was designed during the rising up of the internet to protect these companies to build infrastructure to allow entities and people to come on their platforms and scale up and build up from that. If they had interruptions in that with lawsuits and such, they would not be able to build what they've been building now. So that is different than being a publisher. A publisher is like if you have a website, you go on the website, you can edit things, add things, remove things. You are in full control over what you're adjusting onto that publishing platform, but you now have full liability if someone wants to petition against you, okay, file a lawsuit. Now, the issue is we have these big tech platforms, social media platforms. They've been acting like publishers, but getting the immunity of platforms. So now we have I don't want to say misrepresentation, but now we have an infringement of rights because now people have to go on these monopolies or oligopolies. This is now the public town square where people debate, they have discourse, they agree, they disagree, they communicate with people, they find people, lost friends, lost family members, whatever it is. And now people are getting suppressed or oppressed in different ways just because of their political leaning, just because of their opinion, their ideology, their philosophy, their religion. And so this is inherently un-American. Even though these platforms exist in multiple nations, we're focusing on the American aspect of this because a lot of these companies stem from America. They were built here in Silicon Valley. So now there's two things that government can do. Government can come in and regulate as a public utility. So if there's a monopoly or an oligopoly, the government will come in, like with energy, water, these are utilities. The government will come in because there's not that many competing companies in a region, in an area, and they'll say, we're regulating you as a public utility because this is now the new standard of living that is required for people in this day and age, and we're going to make sure that people cannot be discriminated against just because of their political leaning, their opinions, anything of the sort. The second way to do this, and this is a more libertarian approach, is to incentivize competition. So the government won't come in, they won't regulate, they won't say you're a public utility, but they need to incentivize competition. Now, the government's entire role is to promote individual rights. Having rights as a consumer is a derivative of individual rights. So if the government comes in and applies subsidies or gives tax breaks to certain companies, which they've done before in the past, and it's not a perfect system, you are inherently being selective of who you're going to decide to promote within that industry or which industry you're going to promote in general. But that's the only alternative to this. If government comes in and they say, hey, we're going to give you a break if you want to come and compete in the space, we're going to give you guys some kind of incentive, that now creates more competition in the marketplace. And so if there are 10 companies and someone has kicked off one or two of them, they have 8 other companies to choose from. But they have to be competing companies, meaning right now we have an oligopoly where if you're not on one of the major platforms, there's not really that many alternatives, and those alternatives are very niche. So you can't have the same reach. And it's, of course, when you have different competing companies, it's not like you're going to have the same reach. You may have a slightly different reach, slightly different demographic. But right now, the scale is disproportionate to what you would get on an alternative platform. It's changing a little bit, but it's not even close. So the idea here is, okay, why has the government not come in and done any kind of power? They have the executive power. They can prosecute people for not following Section 230 because they're breaking the law. But why have they not come in and incentivized competition or regulated as a public utility? We've had these internet platforms, this structuring for a long time now. We've had it for years, and it's been decades in the making. Well, the background behind this is a lot of factions of government are actually colluding with these big tech platforms. See, there are certain interests that align, financial, ideological. It could be having more control over the population, gathering data, infringing on privacy, so intruding on people's personal effects, which is unconstitutional. That's against the Fourth Amendment. Yet we've seen these companies work together, or not these companies, but big tech companies working together with government or certain agencies within the executive branch. And that is the opposite of what the government should be doing. Now, the government is made out of people. So these people are able to do what they're doing, get away with this, because they're getting lobbied by certain corporations. They want to exercise more power and grow their centralized authority. And if no one at the bottom, which is we the people, I say we're at the bottom because we're not part of that elite class, but if we below the elite class, we have over 300 million people in this country, if we're not holding these government officials accountable, they get to impose whatever ideology, whatever strategy, whatever tactics they want for their interests. And their interests so happen to align with big tech's interests. So this poses a problem for consumer choice, consumer rights, and therefore individual rights. And if the government is not serving us, that is a huge accountability problem. Now, the government isn't just elected officials. There are unelected officials that are within government. So these people also need to be held accountable. Now, we don't need to do anything unlawful. We're following the law here. We're being, different things like if you protest, civil disobedience, right? But we can start with little things. Contact your congressman. A lot of times you can see where they are, knock on their door, give them a call their office, whatever it is. These are the starting points. You have to start at the grassroots level and then build up. Maybe if you're higher in the hierarchy, you can actually get a lot more done if there's only one of you or a few people on your team. You don't necessarily need 300 million people. It only takes a minority of people to make great change in this country or great change in the world at all. Yet so few people in the minority are willing to collaborate, and they feel like they've been subjugated to a higher power, and therefore they have no power themselves. But it's only when we let those feelings have control over us, and then we start to not take action when the opposite is what we should be doing. We should be taking action. That action needs to be strategic, it needs to be intelligent, and we need to understand that we are going up against people who are intelligent as well. Not all of them are intelligent, but let me also throw this. We have elected officials, and then these elected officials, let's say in the executive branch, they create these federal agencies, and then these federal agencies have people that work within these federal agencies, and these are not elected officials, yet they're passing regulation that is enforced by the executive branch as law. So there's a whole chain of command, there's a whole domino effect of we the people not holding government institutions accountable when they're no longer serving our individual rights, which is the only power that we have as private citizens, and that was designed to combat government tyranny. Because any centralized authority, if you have a country, if you have a sovereign nation, they're going to have a centralized authority. Even if they don't at first, a centralized authority starts to build up because you will have a faction. Well, it's in human nature to want power and leverage that power over others. So you'll have a centralized authority, and they'll want more and more power. And they have to remove your power, which would be our individual rights, in order to increase their power. So I say all that to say, if we want free speech, which is paramount to advancing our civilization, advancing our society, and being able to come up with new concepts, new ideas, new inventions, new equations, new techniques, we have to metaphorically fight for it. It's not an easy process, it's a difficult process, and we want to start it with the judicial, legislative, and executive branch, but ultimately we the people have control over the government. And you'll have people within corporations, because all this revolves around people, we'll have people within corporations who know that they can manipulate the public, who know that they can manipulate people in Congress, because oftentimes Congress are just in the pockets of lobbyists, are in the pockets of these corporations. And we have to be able to hold both parties accountable, because ideally we don't want to live in a society with monopolies and oligopolies. We already have that. Even though we're supposed to be the land of the free, there are tons of oligopolies in the United States of America. And what this does is it restricts better products, restricts better services, and it confines consumers to only one or two pathways. See, if we look at things like the iPhone, or even if you're an Android user, we have a bunch of different phones for the Android operating system. These phones have only come about because there has been new competition, new companies that come into the market, and they compete with the other companies, and they have to one-up each other. It's like an arms race. That only exists when there's an ability, an opportunity for companies to compete with each other. When we remove that opportunity, and oftentimes it's done artificially, because when a company gets to the top, they like to be on top, which means they need to cut that barrier, or they need to create a barrier in between themselves and other companies. However they're going to create that barrier, it could be through regulation, it could be through law. They create that barrier. Now they're number one on top for a longer period of time. The problem is the consumer gets the same product and service until that company decays, and that may take 100 years, 50 years, 200 years. So we don't want that. We want to live in a meritocracy where companies and people are able to come into this space, compete, new ideas, new inventions, new technology, new services, and let these companies compete with each other. And they will all make money because the market share grows over time. As the population grows, as there's more credit, as the pie grows bigger and bigger, these companies have the ability to take advantage over more market share. So financially, they will benefit. They just don't want to put in the work long term because that requires effort. And humans are inherently lazy. They don't want to put in as much effort if they can yield the same result with less energy. So simplistically, we just need to hold these companies accountable, hold people accountable. That's really what it comes down to.